Packer fans, welcome into a all new episode of Pack a Day Live. I am, of course, your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. So excited to be joined by my two good friends. You can follow her on Twitter at Sarah Kelliher 4. I'm upset that there are 3 other Sarah Kellihers that beat her to Sarah Kelliher on Twitter. You can find her, of course, on the Wednesday Pack a Day podcast team. Sarah, how the heck are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Andy. This is exciting. We were talking about it a few minutes ago. It's been a while since the two of us have been able to do anything together. And I think this is the first time we've actually been, face to face, if you want to say that, on camera. So really excited. Paul, great to do this with you too. Regularly read your work on Packers Wire and love what you do. And, this is a treat for me living in Florida, getting to talk to people that, are in Wisconsin and have access to the team. That's exciting for me. So thanks for having me.
You bet. And obviously, again, you can usually find her on the Wednesday show with Dusty and Steve. So she gets a massive upgrade today, getting to talk to Paul and I instead of having to talk to Dusty and Steve. So you're welcome for that as well. Paul, how the heck are you doing? Of course, you can find him on the Packers Wire, sports lead on ESPN Lacrosse. Everywhere else you can find Packers content. Pretty much you can follow him on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. Now I'll ask you, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing excellent, Andy. Always enjoy the opportunity to talk Packers football with you, and Sarah, same goes for you as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited. We've got a ton to talk about. Obviously, for those of you in the chat, if you want to start asking away questions, we will get to everything. We had Gute's press conference today. We had some sad Packers in the locker room following the Rasul Douglas trade. A pretty healthy team overall. Aaron Jones in the red jersey, not because he's transitioning to quarterback, but just obviously to make sure that he doesn't have any contact on the field. Luke Tenuta, you guys, if this team could just get Luke Tenuta healthy, I think we'd see a totally different Packers team. But unfortunately, he is still on IR and in the rehab group. But Paul, I will start with you. I know you were in Gute's press conference. What were sort of your key takeaways from listening in to him and just, his overarching thoughts from the trade and everything else that he went over today?
I would say the big one for me, and I appreciated his honesty around their evaluation of Jordan Love and where they're at with that at this moment, which I don't think they have anything crystal clear. And it was nice to at least hear that honesty from him, because I don't know how you could have a true evaluation of where he stands as a quarterback and what he could potentially be because of all the chaos going on around him. They can't establish the run, the pass protection. It was better against Minnesota, but really over the last 4 games, it's been subpar. The receivers running the wrong routes, drop passes, struggling with contested catches. There's just so much going on around Jordan Love that are not even putting him in position to succeed. And Brian Gutekunst didn't really sugarcoat the answer. He just said, it's really difficult to evaluate given all those issues that are going on with the offense as a whole. So I thought that aspect of it was refreshing. And, they obviously know or have different feelings or know a lot more than us in terms of where their evaluation is for Love. But the worst thing that could happen is they get to the end of the season and they're kind of in that no man's land. That, do we go all in and extend Love and we're going to build around him, or do we draft our new quarterback? Like, drafting your new quarterback and knowing that's what you're going to do isn't the worst outcome. At least you have a path, you have a direction you're heading as a franchise. The worst outcome is if you get to the end and you're kind of like, maybe, and then you don't extend them, or maybe you don't draft the quarterback right away. And it's just that's the worst place to be in, not just in the NFL, but in professional sports, that no direction. So these next 10 games and really getting a feel for, can he be that guy moving forward, is going to be so crucial to just what the next, not just next year, but next few years for this franchise looks like.
Sarah, I'm not sure how much you got to check of Gute's press conference today, but did you have any key takeaways either from listening to it or just some of the snippets that you saw online?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, they talked about wide receivers and just how they haven't had the productivity that they want there. And they said that before trade deadline, that they looked at some things, but Gute said there really wasn't much to look at. And, he's not totally wrong there, but that's an answer that people they're going to get fired up about, of course, knowing how that's a sensitive topic. And he talked about Josh Myers too. There's a narrative right now within the organization that apparently Josh Myers is playing his best football since he's gotten to Green Bay. And that was fun. Andy, I know you had a couple good tweets about that, but it seems like the Packers are all on the same page about that, but nobody else is. So there were just a couple things like that kind of made me raise my eyebrows and go, oh, okay, if that's how you see it. I don't know if that's how most of us see it. And, same with the defense. He said it's like last year they're playing inconsistent, but not only is it inconsistent, but they're just so undisciplined. There are flags, penalties, it feels like almost every other play at times. And Paul, agree with what you said, that this is kind of the time to figure it out. And I think too, in addition to Love, there's going to be guys that, maybe are on the edge of a roster spot that they're going to really fight for a spot and a future spot on this team throughout the rest of the season. When you're a bad team and you're not fighting for a playoff spot or anything like that, you're fighting for your own game and your own position. And we might see some more of that as we get deeper into the season, especially if the Packers continue to lose games.
Yeah, I think I'll quickly go over the Josh Myers thing. I'm so confused. I don't understand it at all. And there's an argument to be made that maybe he's playing the best football of his career just because the other 2 years weren't very good. I think you could certainly make an argument he's playing better than last year just because last year was terrible. I still kind of liked his rookie year a little bit better, if I'm being honest. But if you want to make that argument, fine, so be it. That's not that big of a hill to get over of like, okay, maybe he's playing a little bit better than his 2 previous really bad seasons. But like the fact that they're like going out of their way to be like, yeah, he's playing really good football. I just don't get it because, and I like to pretend that I know a little bit about what I'm watching. And I obviously get to talk to Mike Wall every week of what he's seeing on the offensive line. In no world can I get to the point of that Josh Myers is playing anywhere near like good football. I don't know. I'm so confused by it. I like to the point where I kind of want to go back and just watch every snap of Josh Myers just because this is the kind of sick person that I am, just to be like, is there something I am missing here? Because I am so confused over all of it. And then I think the other thing that you mentioned, Paul, certainly much more important is the evaluation of Jordan Love. And I know it was, Winks thinks, our good friend Bart Winkler, who I think put it perfectly of like, in a perfect science experiment, you want one variable. You want everything else to be constant around that one variable so that you can judge that one variable. And right now, this team is all variables, like at every level. And it's really tough to get a gauge on Jordan Love as the variable because everything else is also a variable. And I think that's perfectly well said. And Gute kind of made the same mention today of like, it's not just hard to evaluate Jordan Love right now. It's hard to evaluate everything because everything is broken, which is not a great statement for the state of the football team at the moment. But that's where they're at. And that's a really interesting, I think kind of take away from that. But yeah, they're going to have 10 games to evaluate Jordan Love the best they possibly can. I will go on the record right now. My guess is they will take a quarterback in next year's draft. But the question is now going to become, all right, is that like hey, we'll take a flyer on a guy in day 3 and see if maybe we just get a lottery ticket and something hits? Or is that, hey, we're going to take somebody on day 1 or 2 and like it's a little bit more serious, maybe a little Brian Brahmy where you maybe have a little bit of insurance if like the top option doesn't go according to plan? Or is this like, hey, we're picking in the top 3 in the draft and maybe we're going to be ultra aggressive and try to get one of those top 2 quarterbacks? That difference is massive in the direction that Green Bay goes in. And they have 10 games to figure out, hopefully 10 games, hopefully he can stay healthy for 10 games and really make that evaluation moving forward. Thoughts on that? Anything I said rambling on?
I would just agree with everything that you said there. It's because you don't see, they get to next offseason, you don't see really the future quarterback playing on a lame duck 1-year deal, which would be the case if they decide to draft someone else early on and kind of see how things play out. And you could take it to the extreme and say, if you're not confident at that point that he can be the guy moving forward and you have a top 5 pick to get one of the top prospects in what is a quarterback rich draft class, like that might be your answer right there. And just kind of change directions as is, because not only are you getting a top talent at the position, but you're getting a reset in terms of the rookie deal. Like if Love is their guy moving forward, there's going to be an extension involved. There's going to be obviously much larger cap hits than what comes with the rookie contract and the tenure of it and all the benefits of that. So the way this season is unfolding, they're going to be in a really, really hard spot in terms of what decisions they have to make, unless hopefully, we start to see a little bit more. But the current state of this offense, like Love's not going to turn it around. Like if the things around him don't improve, we're not going to see that version that we hope to see that can say, all right, this is the guy moving forward. And like I said earlier, they're just going to be stuck in that no man's land at that point.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We had a super chat come in. Tyler, thank you so much for that. Tyler, the question is the draft and develop strategy dead in today's NFL? In my opinion, the CBA limits practice time like never before, and the time given to coaches to develop compared to 25 years ago is so much less. It's tough. Tyler, without going on a 30-minute diatribe and taking the rest of this podcast up, I did do an episode on this last year titled Draft and Develop is Dead. So very easy to find on the YouTube channel. And I definitely recommend going and checking that out. That being said, just a kind of a real quick tangent on, I do agree with a lot of what you are saying. And it's a lot of what I kind of went over as well. You're seeing the best teams. And a part of this is just like, hey, the best way to build a football team is drafting good players, which is like, yeah, duh, we get it. But a lot of the teams that are having success are finding players that can come in and really be high-end players right away, and that you don't have to take the time to develop for. I do think there can be a little bit more of a time and a place, and Green Bay's probably a little bit more in that time and place right now, where draft and develop is okay because you're not in a win now mentality right now. So with like a Lucas Van Ness, you're willing to give it a little bit more time. But I think as a overall, like Rashawn Gary is such a great example of this for so many different reasons. But you get to this point, right, where the first season of Rashawn Gary is basically a redshirt season. The second season, you see some really good signs. The third season, he breaks out, unfortunately has the ACL injury. And then the fourth season, is all of a sudden like gangbusters, is amazing. But then all of a sudden you have to give him this massive contract as soon as like he really starts getting to the point of like, wow, he's great. Well, that's awesome. And you still want that. And I don't think Green Bay's too upset that they, have to give him this huge contract because he's playing so well. But by the time he starts playing awesome, it's immediately like, all right, now we got to make him a top 5 paid edge rusher in the league, where you get some of these other teams of like, and again, I know just draft good players, but like what Jalen Carter's doing in Philadelphia right now, they're going to get that dude for 3-4 years of super cheap, deal with what he's able to do. Even like Christian Gonzalez, before he got hurt this year for New England, he was playing some high-end corner before, in his rookie season. So I think there is a cost-benefit analysis that probably Green Bay needs to look at overarching from where they're at as a franchise right now and see if they want to continue in that direction. But I think the league is going a little bit more away from the draft and develop, specifically because there's not as much time to put in. And so many of these coaches now are focused on, all right, how do we win this week, and game planning and scheming stuff up. And I think it is a little bit less on the development of these players. And I think we're kind of seeing that overall. But Sarah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. And I think, it comes down to everything is faster. People want their teams to win faster. They want success faster. They want players to develop faster. And because of that, people are impatient. They want to see their team succeed right away. When they draft guys, they want to see first year impact. You even see it with coaches. If a coach doesn't turn around a bad team in a year or two, people are already calling for them to be fired. And so that's the direction that the league is going. It's just expectations are higher right out of the gate. And if you can't meet those, then you're in trouble. And, going back to what both of you were saying before about Love and how at the end of this season, the Packers are going to be in a crossroads on how they move forward. If they decide to move forward and get a QB early in the draft, that is a complete shift in how the Packers have operated for years. They have traditionally been this draft and develop, especially at the quarterback position. I mean, we know the rich history there. And this could be an opportunity for them to kind of play catch up in some ways to the rest of the league and what we see other teams, like you said, with the Eagles and guys on their team are doing. So it'll be really interesting to see if the Packers kind of break free of some of those traditional habits that they've had. And, people like to poke fun. They never do anything at the trade deadline or in free agency. And, with the draft, they don't, make exactly, big, sexy picks sometimes, but this could be kind of a generational shift for them. So I'm really curious to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I love your phrasing of there's a time and a place for it. And the Packers aren't hitting enough on this strategy that they lean so heavily on for it to be a thing, something that they can count on. Andy, I know you've tweeted about this. I mentioned it briefly in an article I wrote for Packers Wire talking about draft picks are great. They got 5 in the top 100, but these guys don't develop. It doesn't matter. There's 9 guys left on this team from the 20 and 21 draft classes, and the only 2 like true starters are Love and Stokes. Everyone else, the AJ Dillons, and Josiah DeGuara's, like ideally they have their snaps, they have their roles, but that's what they do. They fill specific roles versus being these go-to guys. And so this draft and develop approach, when you're not hitting at a high enough rate with high impact players, then you end up with what the Packers are struggling with right now. And a big reason they've had to rely so heavily on so many young players is because guys who should be 4 years in, 3 years into their contract, just aren't playing at a high enough level. And I realized I mentioned Myers and Runyon are two other starters from those two classes at the moment, but not necessarily playing at that level. So, but to the point, if you're going to go that approach, you better make sure you're going to hit. Not
to cut you off, Josh Myers is playing the best football of his career. I just want to make sure that we.
Yeah, come on, Paul. Didn't you know that?
Best football of his career.
The message was clear. That organization, even though things are going wrong, they are in lockstep. Everyone, they all agree on the same thing. But if you're going to go that approach, you better hope you hit. And if you don't, like the Packers have missed on a number of picks, you end up relying heavily on these rookie guys because you don't have the year 3, year 4 guys that you should be leaning on in this time, and you're relying on a lot of rookies.
I don't know what I'm going to give you yet, Paul, but if your next Matt LaFleur press conference, you open with the first question and just ask if Josh Myers is playing the best football of his career, there will be some sort of compensation and reward for doing so. But I digress. No, I'm with you. Let's go to Nick's question. Confidence level 0 to 10, that Love is the guy. This is obviously a very loaded question. And we are 7 weeks in, 8 starts total in his career. Anyone want to take this first? Otherwise, I'll go with it. But if anyone's dying to go, anyone?
If we're assuming that 5 is the in between, I would take a 4 or 5. Like I would hang in that. I'd go 4, 4.5. I'd go a little less just because there's definitely areas that he has to improve upon. But and seeing the training camp practices and even the little flashes here and there, like you see the high end potential that's there. Obviously it has to be harnessed at a much more consistent fashion, and the little things have to be executed on much more consistently, much more effectively. But until, like I said earlier, things around him find a way to stabilize, there is just some unknown around it. So even though as bad as the offense looks, I'm not going to shoulder or put all that on Jordan Love and say 0 or 1, but also at the same end of the spectrum, he's not been in my eyes anyways, 7, 8 plus either. So I would hang in that 4 to 5 range, just kind of taking the easy way out to a degree, because there's just so much unknown still.
Sarah?
Yeah, a similar answer. I was going to say about a 5.5, but if you look at him in the second half, maybe you say a 7, because second half Jordan Love has been on point. But that's the thing, Paul. You nailed it. It's just the inconsistencies, and you see that there's flashes and moments, especially in the first couple of weeks. In week 1 against the Bears and then against the Saints in that fourth quarter, there were moments where you're like, wow, he could really be the guy. He seems very poised, and he was making better decisions at that point in time, and then from there, there's really just been sort of a regression. And that's what gives me pause a little bit and makes me nervous and kind of lean towards, okay, I'm going to, play it safe in the middle there. I'm going to try to be positive and confident that, he could be the guy, but I'm not convinced or buying in on that yet.
It was weird. There was something in this game, and I've been kind of searching for it, and I can't exactly put my finger on it, but there was just a tangible feel in this past game where I'm like, something just doesn't feel right. And I'm just saying, like, I'm 0% confident of what he's ultimately going to end up being. I still think I would love to see another 10 games of him this season, regardless of what happens, because the last thing you want is to decide to go in a different direction. And then he goes and tears it up somewhere else and it clicks somewhere else. And you spent 4 years drafting and developing this guy, getting him to the level he needs to be. You give up a year too early, and then he goes up and tears it up somewhere else. So you want to be abundantly sure. And I'm in no way, shape, or form saying I am all out on Jordan Love or anything like that. I absolutely want more time. But this was the first game this week where I'm like, man, there were just some throws. Like, the weird thing is, to me, there's the throw down the sidelines where Dobbs came open at the end and he's on the opposite side of the field. And he barely steps into it and he flings it down the field and somehow overthrows him. And it's 60 air yards and it doesn't even look like he's trying. And that throw is such an enigma to me, because there are a ton of other deep balls where it's I don't know if he's trying to put too much air under it or he's just overthinking it, or it just like, because there's so many underthrows and it's just weird at times because you see a throw like that and you're like, okay, the arm is not a problem here. He clearly has enough arm strength to get it anywhere he needs to on the field. And that one had zip on it too. And again, totally across the field, diagonal shot down to Romeo Dobbs. But I don't know. There's just times where I watch it and it just feels like when a dart player is like trying to aim almost too much and it doesn't work. And you just have to kind of let it go and let it kind of guide itself. It looks like he is like trying to guide everything maybe a little bit too much. And I think this goes back to some of the like Matt LaFleur stuff early on with Jordan Love and being like, he just has to trust it and let it rip. And I did feel like in camp and even against Chicago a little bit, when there wasn't all the chaos that we're seeing right now, I did feel like he had a little bit more rhythm and was letting it rip a little bit more. And now I'm just like, it kind of feels like he's guiding again and overthinking again. And that's why I feel like and Green Bay needs more time to evaluate him, because it is tough when the offensive line isn't protecting, where there's a zero running game, where wide receivers aren't in the right spot. And so much of the stuff is ad-libbed and off, script. It's really tough to just gauge everything in that. And you do wonder if maybe he could just, hit my drop and let it rip a little bit more based on everything that's around him. I probably feel a lot better, but this is the first game where something in me was just like something tangible doesn't totally feel the way that it's supposed to at this point. But like I said, I want a lot more time to evaluate it if possible.
I think that's a really good observation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as you were talking and thinking back to training camp, like on those deep balls when he did miss, the ones I'm remembering were long.
Yep.
And then Matt LaFleur has the comment about, like you said, need to get more air under it. So now everything you said aligns with that of someone who's working on that. But, anyone who's played sports, no, you can't be in the court, on the field, wherever you are, thinking about the process and how you need to execute, because like you said, then you look like you're steering things and not letting it rip. And Love even said in the press conference after Sunday's game, he was asked about his decisiveness. And early on in training camp and even in the season, like that was one of the things that really stood out. But he even said, yeah, I'm not as decisive as I need to be right now. And again, that's a factor to what's going on around him. If your receivers aren't in the right spot, if they're not dropping, or if they're dropping passes, if you're uncertain about your offensive line, like that's going to cause some hesitation. Obviously it's easier said than done, because when you're in the heat of the moment, you're just going to react how you react. But to a degree, he's just got to, if the receiver's supposed to be there, throw it there. And if they're not there, then, at least there at that point, there's film for Matt LaFleur and everyone else to digest and be like, you did what you were supposed to do. There's something I feel like for additional to grasp on, and like, all right, we're seeing progress in that regard. And, we'll work with the receivers. But again, that, I know saying that is obviously a lot more simpler than just the actual execution of it in a game.
Very, very much so. Any final thoughts on that, Sarah, or should we continue on to the next one?
No, we can move on.
All right, let's go to the next one. F, thank you. First of all, I like the name, just F. Gute translation, Josh Myers is amazing. We definitely didn't want Creed Humphrey. And yes, it does feel like maybe there's a little bit of overcompensation there of like, when you're like, yeah, I'll leave it at that. It does feel like maybe there is a little bit of overcompensation of like, yeah, Josh Myers is great. You don't even have to watch him. Just don't even watch him. He's great. Don't worry about it. But like I said, if the best word for me is confusion, there's another one too. Vex, who I always appreciate, comes into, I think, every single chat. Vex, you're the best. It absolutely boils my blood to have Brian Gutekunst to lie about the performance of the O-line in a press conference in the middle of a disaster. We're not stupid. I don't know. A GM's job description in like one of like the first 3 lines is to lie about crap. Like you literally have to as a GM. I get that. There are weird moments with Brian. I mentioned this one the other day, like when he was asked initially about like bringing back Jimmy Graham for another reason or another season when he did. And like how awful he was as a blocker when he was literally just god awful as a blocker. And he responded with, I actually think like Jimmy Graham did a really nice job blocking last year. And my mind just melted on the spot because I'm like, is this one where you're just like, are you just messing with us? Are you lying to us? Or like, cause if you believe that, we might have some serious problems here. If that's what you think. I don't know what to make of this overall. And the fact that Steno said it and Gute said it, I do think that there are levels of football that people in that organization know that I will just aspire to. And sometimes they see things that we just don't. Maybe Josh has been phenomenal from a communication standpoint on the offensive line and getting everyone into the right checks and making sure, because it's one thing when you've got Aaron as the quarterback to, to make all those checks and make everything right at the line. When you don't, when you don't have Aaron, a lot of times that can fall a lot more on the center, at least a better communication there. Maybe Josh has been amazing at that. And that's just something that we can't see. I have no idea, but it just seems very odd based on what the untrained, naked, amateur eye, whatever you want to call it, sees on a day-to-day basis. And I thought he had another rough game this week. It's just, it's really, really interesting. Any Josh Myers thoughts before we hopefully don't have to talk about it anymore?
I think there's another side to it too. When we think about it from Gute's perspective, if he comes out and says what everybody's thinking, that Josh Myers isn't playing well, there's potential to piss some people off in the locker room and lose some guys. Clearly, Myers is respected. He's a captain some weeks too. And so if you ruffle feathers there when you're already having a bad season, that could just cause more problems. And I don't know if necessarily overcompensating in this way and everybody saying, he's so great, we love him, he's the best, is the answer. But I do try to see it from the other perspective that, if he's too honest, then that could cause more problems.
Totally agreed. Paul, any other thoughts on Josh Myers?
No, I got nothing.
Good. No, that's good. Only not because I'm done with the conversation. I think at this point, I don't want to talk about Josh Myers anymore. All right, let's talk about the Valzad, last son of Krypton. Also, great name, a little bit different than just F, but great nonetheless. Can someone let Barry know that it is okay to move Gary around the defensive line, that it's okay to have multiple pass rushers in, and that it's okay to play man on 3rd and long, and it's also okay to blitz? I will make that list, son of Krypton, and try to get it over to him as quickly as possible. There's a couple things here that I just want to hit on quick, and then Paul, kick it over to you here as well. The first thing I'll say about moving Gary around is he's having a ton of success in obvious passing situations, doing what he's doing. I don't think you want to necessarily mess with it too much. And I do think there's opportunities to maybe take advantage of a lesser offensive lineman and just get him matched up one-on-one. And that's great. But like, he's beating really good offensive linemen and offensive tackles, just doing what he's doing and rushing from his spots on the edge. I don't know that you need to like overthink that too much. I know a lot of people might point to his sacks and be like, yeah, but look at his sack totals aren't that great. I will point to another piece in this of like, it's okay to, play press man. Like, they're playing a lot of off coverage and they're allowing a lot of checkdowns on stuff. And when you're a quarterback and you see Rashawn Gary coming, it's like, oh, check down, and it doesn't end up in a sack. And I think when you have that safety valve as a quarterback, it's going to be tough for Rashawn Gary to, pile up 20 sacks in a game. The other thing, as I talked about today with Sam Monson, is, when the best time to get sacks is when you're winning and the opposite team has to pass in late in games to get back in the game. Green Bay's not winning ever, basically. And certainly, even against New Orleans, when they did win, they had to come back at the end. So New Orleans on one drive only was in pass only mode. Atlanta, you had some opportunities. Chicago, you had some opportunities. But for the most part, this hasn't been a team that's been up. And in those games early in the year, Rashawn wasn't playing as much. So he hasn't had his full, set of snaps when they've actually been up in games where he can just go and hunt the quarterback. So I digress on that one. I think Gary's sacks will come based on his pressure percentage and just kind of doing what he's doing. All the other stuff, specifically, playing up a little bit more on 3rd downs. These are all things, obviously, we've been over for 3 years. Joe Barry is clearly very married to his concepts and what he wants to do, for better or worse. And I will lean the latter on that more often than not. I just hope we get another season where, with 7 games left, they have the conversation of, I think we need to be a little bit more aggressive. And then they figure it out in the last 7 games, play well again. But Paul, take it away.
I feel like since we're in, I believe, year 3 of Joe Barry, that if we're going to get to the aggressive point, we would have been there by now. But I want to just go down a path that Rasul Douglas brought up following the Vikings game, because I just thought it was a really interesting perspective and what, he views that this defense is going through. We talk about on the Packers offensive side of the ball, how they can't get into a rhythm. You're going 3 and outs. You can't fully execute your game plan on and what you've worked on for the entire week. Flipping that over to the Packers opponents and their offense, because they know, and this was, paraphrasing what Rasul Douglas said, but because they know they don't have to put up a lot of points, they don't feel that pressure. They don't have to get out of rhythm. They can run their offense and what they game plan for. And if it doesn't work initially, there isn't that added pressure of, oh, we got to put up points, or we're down 7, we're down 10. And they can just continue to do what they've worked on, what it is that they do best. And I just thought that was a really interesting perspective on his part in terms of what this defense is going up against. Now, with that said, of course, they absolutely have to be better. Like, this was the defense, the offensive line, like these were supposed to be the key elements of this Packers team that the first time starting quarterback, the young group of pass catchers were going to be able to lean on this year to provide some form of stability, or at least kind of a floor for what this team could be. And neither of those units have provided that. And now with Rasul in Buffalo, that's going to become harder. Like, this team is worse, and there's a trickle down effect to the offensive side of the ball with that. If the defense is giving up more points, the offense is down by more. They can't utilize the run game maybe as much as they want to. They're in more predictable passing situations. They're one dimensional. Like, there's a potential negative trickle down effect to trading Rasul Douglas that is going to make Jordan Love's job even more difficult. And going back to our original conversation, the evaluation of him with that. So I think in addition to the new look cornerback room, or not new look, but different cornerback room that they have now, the pass rush, bouncing back to that topic, has to get much more consistent, like outside of Rashawn Gary. That's been, looking at that unit over the summer, I'll speak for myself and say, it looked like they just had a ton of pass rush options up front to be able to get after the quarterback. Like, that was going to be a strength, something that defense could lean on. And that consistency outside of Rashawn Gary just has not been there from that unit. They've had some big moments on third downs kind of sprinkled in here and there throughout the season. But again, going back to one of the overall issues with this team, the consistency point of it, that just hasn't been there for them.
Totally agreed. I want to get to a couple more super chats really quick. Absolutely boils my blood to have, no, we went over that one. Sorry. Preston, after Barry watches film every week, he slams his fist into his desk and says, aha, I've got it, and plays his defensive back 5 yards further back. It does feel that way sometimes, Preston. And obviously we just went over him playing, not the most aggressive defensive backs in the NFL. I don't think that's going to change now that they've got Carrington Valentine instead of Rasul Douglas. So expect a little bit, even maybe more off coverage. I'm for better or worse, I am slightly excited to watch Carrington Valentine play. I don't think we've seen the in-season Carrington Valentine that we saw, in training camp and in preseason. I think that's going to happen for a rookie corner, but I do think he's a super talented individual. I'm not saying he's going to sink or swim at this point, but I'm interested to see which one of those it ends up being. And I think that the snaps are going to be super valuable for him, but that'll be another one. And yes, Vex, Brian Gutekunst also said Rashid played great and they just benched him. There's sometimes a little bit of a disconnect there. And again, to Sarah's point, you don't want to throw guys under the bus and just be like, yeah, man, we missed on him. And boy, we had to bench him this past week and it's not going great. Of course, he's going to say something positive, but it's just interesting to see how positive sometimes they go in the opposite direction. Sarah, I will leave this one for you because it's really easy. Is it coaching? Is it the quarterback? Is it the young players? Or is it all of the above? I will let you take it in any direction you want to go.
I think it's all of the above. We've talked about it. I mean, this is, if Andy, if you need to put a description for this episode, this could be the description. We've talked about all of this, and there's issues with coaching. We just talked about it with Barry. With Love, there isn't confidence that he can be the guy. And now we're in this evaluation period where it's sink or swim, and then figure out what the future of this team looks like. And then there's young players that are just missing right now. They're running the wrong routes. They're not where they should be. There, is just stupid penalties and stupid mistakes. And so you mush all that together, and it's an ugly scene. And that's what we're seeing, the last few weeks. And it's really as simple as that. I don't think it boils down to one thing. Sometimes, one of those things emerges more one week than the other. I think on Sunday, it was a little bit of everything. And that's when you just kind of shake your head and hold on tight, because it feels like it's going to be a long year.
Very much so. Vex, year 5 of Matt LaFleur and Aaron Jones still doesn't get the ball. I think the ironic thing here, Vex, is I think of all the seasons, and we saw this a little bit in Chicago, that I think Aaron Jones was going to get a bulk of the ball. I think this was probably going to be the season with the young offense that they had. And unfortunately, the injury is just not cooperated with that. And then when they get him back, like, you can tell like even after games, he's still like, there's still some residual effect and they want to make sure he's getting to 100%. They're being extra cautious. I promise you, Matt LaFleur wants to get Aaron Jones the ball more right now, especially with the way things are going on offense, but they're also trying to take it as easy as possible on Aaron to make sure that they don't give it to him 20 times this week and then he's out 4 more weeks. That's not going to, help anyone either. But I do think ironic, like whatever we want to call it, he was going to get the ball a lot more this year. And it just, the injury has come at one of the worst times for both Green Bay and Aaron Jones. Patrick, I'm going to come back to yours. I want Paul to take this one. Tyler asks, does not having an owner in rough times like this make it easier or harder for Green Bay to rebuild?
It's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that one before. I guess for me, I don't think it makes it more difficult. I think it just kind of, it's Green Bay's reality. Obviously, I think the instances of where we see the owner in play is when they're doing the shot or calling the shots in terms of personnel. The obviously the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones comes to mind. And I guess my thought on that is I don't think the owner should be involved in that capacity. So I guess my thought on it, and could be completely wrong, but thinking about it in that regard, I feel like it's not hurting them that they don't have the owner in terms of the rebuild. Now, could that individual be there to, get rid of, the coach or the GM sooner than what could happen normally? Potentially. But again, I feel like a lot of times the owners that we do see heavily involved that doesn't translate to, wins on the field. So I guess that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah. I think if anything, sometimes it can buy the GM a little bit more time. If you have an owner in Green Bay, like take the Rasul trade, for instance, I think if there's a legitimate owner in Green Bay, there's probably more pressure on Brian and Matt, for better or worse. Maybe that's better, maybe that's worse, but there's probably more pressure on Brian to save his job, would be my guess, and like just win right now. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you end up with aggressive bad trades in order to just save your job rather than make the best decision that's in the long-term interest of the Green Bay Packers. If anything, and I said this the other day too, I'm impressed with Brian because there's a human element to this of, hey, if I don't start picking up some wins soon, I might not be here to get to use that 3rd round pick when it comes up. Like that can be a real thought that comes into your mind. And maybe Brian's been given carte blanche to say like, hey, we know things are going to be difficult because of all this stuff that you guys had to do to keep the 2021 and 2022 teams together, whatever. Not sure. But the fact that he had still the ability to make decisions for the future of the team rather than the now, when we are starting to see, just a little bit more of a pressure kind of boil up from the fan base of like, hey, something's got to change here. That gives me confidence that his mind is still in the right place to make those sort of decisions. And I think sometimes with an owner, you might not have that grace and that time frame to be able to make those decisions. And again, you end up making Chicago, and I know this is a bad example because Green Bay tried to make the trade too, but you end up with Chicago, Chase Claypool, near 1st round pick trades in those situations. So we had to get a couple other ones really quick here, and then I got to get out of here because I got to pick up a kid from basketball. But Patrick, I joke about our 3rd round picks, but is there something philosophical Green Bay does in that round that gets them in trouble? Overemphasis on RAS or just bad luck? I do tend to believe it's probably just a little bit more bad luck, but sometimes what can happen, in my opinion, in the 3rd round, to me, the top 100 and then after the top 100 are like almost like 2 totally different drafts. Like basically the first 3 days of the draft and then the first 2 days of the draft and then day 3 of the draft are almost like 2 different drafts, where the first 2 days you are taking a lot of really high-end athletes and players that have tried to almost hit all of these boxes, where they're high-end athletes, they've played at big-time colleges, they've had big-time production, they don't have injury issues. Like, you're trying to check as many of those boxes as you can. And I think sometimes what happens, especially when you're consistently picking at the end of the 3rd round, is you're now at the bottom of the barrel of those players that check a lot of those boxes and that everyone else has passed on. And you still kind of take some of those players that are still in there. But you're kind of reaching sometimes for like, all right, these are still players that played at big schools or high-end athletes and yada, 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 but maybe aren't just quite as good. And then a lot of times I feel like almost on day 3 of the draft, you get more of like the, hey, this guy doesn't have like 3 of these things. Maybe it was a small school and he, ran a 4.740 or something crazy or whatever, but like they're really great at football and you've got some other intangibles that are really cool. Your Puka Nakuas of the world. And all of a sudden you start taking chances on those. And sometimes those guys can pay off a little bit more, which Green Bay has done. They've hit on some Zach Toms and those sort of players in the past. So I just think it's almost like 2 different drafts. And sometimes when you're picking at the end of the 3rd round, sometimes you can kind of get caught with a barrel of players that just aren't very good left. That's my amateur, probably not true hypothesis, but I'm going to stick with it anyway. Maybe it sounds smart. Maybe it sounds dumb, but I'm sticking with it. And then Vex, before we get out of here, can I be disappointed with LVN yet? Another project. Sarah, any thoughts on LVN really quick?
I don't think you can be disappointed yet. There's definitely been good things that we've seen. And, this is a guy we talked about, draft and develop. I think there may be a little bit of that, but he's one that I lean more confident that it's going to work out. So I don't think you should be too worried yet. And that there's some good potential there.
Patience with LVN. Of all the players from this, I'm very confident still he's going to be a good player in this. I don't know what that ceiling is where he ultimately reaches. I'm very confident he's going to be a good player in this league. And I thought, go watch him closely this past week. I thought there was some good tape that he put out there, both as a run defender, a little bit as a pass rusher. You can just tell he's raw. And I get that can be frustrating at times, but I do think he's going to be a good player down the road, maybe taking a little bit of that Rashawn Gary trajectory along the way. Paul, where can we find all of your amazing work as we get out of here?
Appreciate it, Andy. This is fun. Find my work over at Packers Wire. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Bretl.
And Sarah.
Yeah, you can follow me at Sarah Kelliher 4, and I'm on the Pack Day podcast every Wednesday with Steve and Dusty.
Make sure to check that out. Of course, check out Paul as well. You can follow me at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack Day Podcast. Blame my son that we didn't get to talk longer because I got to pick him up from basketball. I will see everyone soon. Sarah, you're the best. Paul, you're the best. Until next time. And as always, go Pack Go.